Right, I'm back. Sorry, I wasn't watching the time. Got cut off. I was talking about Masada. Before I get there, I don't want you to get it confused. Masada confused with Megiddo. Look on page 445. You'll see the Valley of Megiddo. This is where Revelation talks about the Battle of Armageddon. You may have heard it before. This is the last final battle of mankind, of human history. This is right before Jesus comes back on the thousand-year millennial reign. He's going to defeat all of the armies of the world. They're all going to gather together in the valley to try and defeat God, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, but they do. On page 447, I don't have the picture here, but the Battle of Megiddo is, or we call it the Battle of Armageddon, is fought in the Valley of Megiddo. You can see it pictured on page 447. This is where the armies of the world will gather to fight against God. That's different from Masada. So on page 440, oh, I lost my place. On page 440, I'm sorry, 451, you will see the box with Masada. I really want you to read these boxes because some of your questions can come from these boxes. Hint, hint. Make sure you read those boxes. But the Battle of Masada is an interesting battle, and it shows you Israel's feat. So I had this slide up here before I got cut off, and we saw King Herod is the one that built Masada, but it wasn't really used until this hideout in AD 70. So it earns its fame from this battle in AD 70. What happens is the Jews revolt against the Romans. They're tired of the Romans' oppression. And the Jewish revolt, like they had in the past, but Tiberius, who was the leader, the emperor of Rome at this time, says enough. He goes over to Jerusalem. He destroys Jerusalem, burns it to the ground. He burns the temple. This is when the temple is destroyed, as Jesus prophesied. But the Jews hated the Romans, and they weren't going to surrender to the Romans. So a bunch of Jews ran to this mountaintop. You can see it better pictured on 451, where it's just like this mountain sticking up in the middle of nowhere. And they run up this mountain, and they're totally secluded from everywhere else, and the armies can't go up, at least in the formation that they need to defeat the Jews. The Jews are hiding out up there, so he totally surrounds them. He tries to starve them out, which he does. He'll eventually starve them out, but the Jews just won't surrender. So finally, as he's starving them out, he's building a ramp up to Masada. This is Silva. He was the Roman captain at this time that was sent to crush the Jews. So Silva's trying to get up Masada. As he builds this ramp, he finally is able to go up to the top to finally cut off any other Jews that are alive, take them back. But the Jews were not about to be captured by the Romans. So they devised this plan. They said the man of every house will kill the women and children, and then the men, the fathers, will come together, and they will choose one to kill all of the men, and then the one man will kill himself. Because, according to the Jewish law, murder is not as bad as suicide. Suicide was looked more down upon than murder. So, in order for one person to take the brunt for the suicide instead of all the men committing suicide and their families committing suicide, there was only one person out of all Masada that committed suicide, and that was the one person left. And whenever the Romans get up to the very top, they see no one alive. And it's kind of a slap in the Romans' face, if you will, to say, listen, we'd rather die than become Roman prisoners. So the Jews kind of stand up for themselves. And Masada, pretty big statement that they have there. Now, Judaism comes about around this time that we see the Jews finally disperse, and From this, we get the religion of Judaism, which is uh, what we see through the Old Testament, but this is the Old Testament continuing on. They don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. They believe the Old Testament. They believe many of the things we as Christian believes in the Old Testament, but they do not believe the New Testament is legitimate because they don't believe Jesus was the Son of God. They're still looking for the Messiah. So that's the difficulty about ministering to Jews. There's in our church we have a group of girls from West Coast Baptist Bible College that come and they witness to Jews here in Miami. We have a lot of Jews in Miami, especially Miami Beach, and it's very difficult to minister to them because they're still looking for the Messiah. So it's a different kind of ministering and witnessing to them as it would be someone else. So Judaism comes about, but another term we hear about this region is the Palestinians. Now, who are the Palestinians? This is just a term to refer to the Arab population living between Egypt at the very bottom and Phoenicia, which is the very top when we think of Turkey area. So it's Lebanon, Syria, Israel. These are the Palestinians. It's just a pretty generic term. Now, we already talked about the creation of the state. We mentioned the 6-day war, literally the 6 days that Israel is going to defeat Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. And this is where Israel proves itself. Listen, we mean business. And we're not just a country that, we were given this land as something nice. We can't stand up for ourselves. With the U.S. help, Israel will stand up against these 3 countries, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, against the 6-day war. In the 6-day war. Another big one is the Yom Kippur War. Yom Kippur is a holiday. It was around the time of the Yom Kippur. And the U.S. again will come to Israel's help. And notice defeat Egypt and Syria again. Those 2 coming out again. We're going to see in U.S. history, if you remember, it was a huge deal to have Anwar Sadat and the leader of Israel come together with Carter at the Camp David Accords. That Egypt and Israel came together with the help of the United States. And this was huge because Egypt has always been fighting Israel because, especially Egypt and Syria, the most aggressive ones, that do not believe Israel is a country. Probably the most passive one, the very last one that we see on 554 is Jordan. Before I get there, I want you to notice on 553, the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was kind of funny how the Dead Sea Scrolls were happening. This shepherd was throwing rocks in a cave and he hears it break something. He's like, what happened? So, excuse me, he goes inside the cave and he looks and he sees a clay pot broken. Now, when he looks in the clay pot, he sees these scrolls. Now, this was around the Dead Sea area. And as we mentioned, the Dead Sea, Masada overlooks the Dead Sea, so there's a bunch of cliffs around the area, and he throws a rock and he finds the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, in the Dead Sea Scroll, there were partial scrolls, but there were also full scrolls as well. In fact, the whole entire Old Testament was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, except the whole Bible, really, except the book of, you'll notice, Esther and Nehemiah. But there were also hymns as well, and a lot of records found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this was a big find. Jordan, we already mentioned, one of the most stable and peaceful countries in the region. That's very important to note. Although there is a large Sunni Islamic population there. So although there's many Muslims, it is a relatively peaceful, compared to all the rest that's going on, relatively peaceful. Out of all the other countries, it is the most peaceful. Located in Jordan, it's probably one of the most famous works that are there is the Petra. This is literally a city carved out of rock. And you can see a picture of it there. You can also see a picture of it in your book on 554. It's pretty amazing, just the architecture, one, to build a building, but two, just to hew it out of a rock is pretty special. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. You will do the section quizzes on 554 along with 549. You'll do those section quizzes with the quiz over this material. So I hope it helps. Hope you guys have an awesome day, and we'll see you in class.